Welcome back to History Recaps. Today we will talk about the real Riddler, a serial killer and a ghost. He was so clever that the police never found him. Or did they find him? Why was he always one step ahead? Why was he called the Zodiac Killer? Who was the Zodiac Killer? For more than 5 decades, American authorities have been answering this question and deciphering the identity of the Zodiac Killer. There has never been a shortage of suspects. Numerous criminals also outed themselves as the serial killer. Never true, and never was anyone on trial for the gruesome murders. But now a group of former investigators who call themselves the Casebreakers want to find out who the Zodiac Killer really was. If they are right, it would be a sensation. Even if there is a downer in the matter, the suspicious man died in 2018. A chronicle of the crimes attributed to the Zodiac Killer. Between December 1968 and October 1969, the Zodiac Killer is said to have murdered numerous people. He sent encrypted letters to the police and the newspapers in which he mocked them. How many exactly, is not proven. In a letter, the killer himself speaks of having killed 37 people. However, the authorities confirm only 7 victims, 2 of whom survived. And then the murders suddenly stopped. The Zodiac Killer terrifies California. December 20, 1968. The nightmare began in 1968 when 17-year-old David Faraday went on a date with his young girlfriend, Betty Lou Jensen, in the evening. The lovers had told their parents that they wanted to attend a Christmas concert. In truth, they drove a few miles out of the city to have fun near a waterworks, as so many lovers did back then. Raccoon hunters still saw a second car parked next to Faraday and Jensen's. But that's all there is to it. What exactly happened then is difficult to reconstruct due to a lack of witnesses. The driver of the second car is said to have got out and shot the right rear window with a pistol. The young couple then tried to flee. Faraday was seriously injured by a shot to the head while leaving the car and fell on the gravel floor in front of the passenger door. Jensen ran away, but was hit in the back by 5 bullets after about 9 meters and also fell to the ground. A local resident found the victims and drove off to get help. When the police arrived at the scene, Betty Lou had died and her boyfriend died a short time later in a hospital. The investigation did not lead to any perpetrator. July 4, 1969. Only half a year later, in July 1969, the killer struck again. That Friday, waitress Darlene Farron and a friend Mike Maju were chased by a bright car. When she turned into a parking lot, her engine failed. The pursuer also parked briefly next to them, but drove away, only to return a few minutes later. This time the stranger parked behind Darlene's car, so her path had been cut off. The stranger got out and blinded her with a hand lamp, which is why Darlene and Mike also thought it could be a policeman. He approached the car and shot at the couple without words. Darlene was hit by 11 bullets and Margot also suffered severe gunshot wounds. The perpetrator then drove away. The victims were found by teenagers and were still alive at the time. Darlene died in hospital. Her friend Mike survived the attack. While doctors were fighting for their lives, a man called the police and said in a calm tone that he wanted to report a double murder. If you drive a mile east to the park on Columbus Parkway, you will find 2 young people in a brown car in the parking lot. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed the 2 young people last year. The call came from a phone booth not far from Darlene Farron's home. A short time later, the doorbell rang in the house. When the receiver was picked up, you could only hear a heavy, deep breathing at the other end, but the caller said nothing. A few minutes later, Darlene Farron's parents-in-law and her brother-in-law received similar calls. When the anonymous calls were received by Farron's relatives, the attack had not yet been reported in the media. September 27, 1969, half a year later, 2 more young people fell victim to the Zodiac Killer. The 2 students Cecilia Ann Shepard and her boyfriend Brian Hartnell spent an afternoon on a secluded stretch of beach on Lake Berryessa. Cecilia saw a man who seemed to be watching the couple. The man also soon came closer and she recognized a pistol in his hand. He said he wanted her money and the car keys to go to Mexico. He had broken out of a prison, shot a guard and therefore had nothing more to lose. Brian handed everything to the stranger, who then ordered them to lie face down on the ceiling. Brian, who was a law student, offered him legal help and asked if the gun was even loaded. The stranger pulled out the magazine as proof and showed him the cartridge inside. After that, the man began to stab Hartnell and then Shepard with a long knife. The perpetrator left the scene without the money or the car. But before that, he wrote on the door of Hartnell's car the date of the first 2 attacks at Vallejo as well as the date, time and method of committing the crime in the attack on Lake Berryessa. Although a fisherman found the 2 seriously injured, Cecilia and Shepard died of 24 stab wounds. Her boyfriend survived the attack. Again, a call to the police followed. "I want to report a murder, no, a double murder. They are located 3 kilometers north of park headquarters. They were driving a white VW Carmen Ghia. I'm the one who did it." October 11, 1969, the last murder attributed to the Zodiac happened a few weeks later. The taxi driver Paul Lee Stein took a passenger with him, who told him his goal, that they also reached a good 15 minutes later. Once there, the stranger drew a pistol and shot the driver in the right cheek. Party guests in a nearby house said they had seen a fight in the taxi and called the police. Unfortunately, for reasons that have not been clarified, the description of the perpetrator stated that the perpetrator was probably of African American descent, but he was white. This white man was also stopped by a police patrol, but because the man did not fit the description, he was not arrested. The taxi driver Stein succumbed to his injuries. This time, however, there was a description of the perpetrator, also from the policeman who had stopped the white man. The Zodiac Killer communicated intensively with the police and the newspapers. Part of the message was readable, another part had been written in a kind of code of circles, triangles, crosses, the Morse alphabet and Greek characters. It took years for his messages to be decrypted. The first letter reached the editors of the San Francisco Chronicle a few days after the first murder of the young couple. The sender of the letter claimed that his identity was encrypted in the secret text. He demanded that the newspapers print their respective part of the secret text on their front page by Friday afternoon, otherwise he would commit more murders over the weekend. Even if the editors did not comply with all demands, there were no murders the following weekend. A pair of teachers was able to decrypt the message. Although the first letter contained details of the crime that had not been disclosed by the investigators, the police chief was not convinced and publicly asked the sender to write another letter in which he was to prove his perpetration. The murderer then sent a 3-page letter, which began with the words "Dear Mr. Editor-in-Chief, here speaks Zodiac," and in which further, as yet not publicly known details of the crime were described. It was the first time that the stranger called himself a Zodiac. This letter should not be the first. 12 more followed, all provided with codes. The last verified letter dates back to 1974. The reasons why the communication and the murders broke off can only be speculated. There was never a shortage of suspects. But because there were no DNA tests at that time, saliva traces on the letters could not be taken and compared. Gary Francis Post is the Zodiac Killer? Evidence supports this. Now the mystery of the Zodiac Killer is said to have been solved. The group The Case Breakers has written on the banner of re-rolling up so-called cold cases and, in the best case, solving them. A hint from a man led the former investigators on the trail of Gary Francis Post. Post had allegedly tried to kill the whistleblower with a hammer. No police can question him himself, because Post died in 2018 at the age of 80. According to the Case Breakers, these 4 points are intended to prove that Gary Francis Post is the wanted serial killer. 1. There is a police drawing from 1969, which was made according to the information of a victim who survived. Especially the forehead scars were conspicuous and they were confirmed by numerous victims, including a police officer. Post also had forehead names, which are said to come from an operation after a car accident in 1959. 2. Numerous counterparts were found at a crime scene in 1966, including a watch that Post allegedly bought at a military base. At the time, Post, as a former soldier, was being treated for a gunshot wound in a veterans hospital just 15 minutes from the scene. The watch showed splashes of paint and Post worked as a painter for over 40 years after his release from the military. 3. The crime scene investigators found boot traces at 4 crime scenes that pointed to military boots. The shoe size matches that of Gary F. Post. 4. 4 brown strands of hair were found on one victim. Post had brown hair. At the time of the investigation, the DNA test procedure had not yet been developed, which came only 20 years later. But the DNA relieved a former despiser years later. There are apparently no traces of DNA from Post that could be compared to the hair. That would be clear proof. The scars on Gary Post's forehead are said to be the same as on the police drawing. Recently, the former daughter-in-law of the alleged serial offender came forward. She testified that she left San Francisco at the time after Post repeatedly threatened her. Whether these are all just clues or the team really got behind the secret of the Zodiac Killer will only become clear when there should still be a DNA sample. Even after 52 years, the serial killer still occupies the world. If you like this video and want to watch more stories like that, please subscribe, like and hit the bell.